This episode is sponsored today by the book 10 Tips on How to Survive Your Parents' Divorce. This book was written by kids. It's for kids. It's a coloring book. When you have a tragedy of divorce and you have young children who do not know how to express themselves, this coloring book, 10 Tips on How to Survive Your Parents' Divorce, is the coloring book for them. Pick it up today at blendingthefamily.com or even on Amazon. 10 Tips on How to Survive Your Parents' Divorce. Again, written by kids for kids.
Welcome to Blending the Family, the podcast. Topics can range from dads hitting rock bottom, daughters watching their parents divorce, or even what is a good wine for couples to have while talking about finances. Here's your host, whose favorite wine is red and free. Cheap, Tommy Maloney.
There is nothing wrong with red wine. And free! I love free red wine. Welcome to another edition of Blending the Family. My name is Tommy Maloney. I am your host. Thanks for tuning in. I think that's, the more I think about it, I think that's having a radio background. I think that's where I get that from, tuning in from back in the day. Hey kids, gather around. Uncle Tommy's going to tell you a story. When you had to, all right, so here's the thing. If you're too young to understand this, on your car right now, you might have a knob for the volume, but back in the day, gosh, I feel old. But back in the day, to get to the radio station you wanted to listen to, you had knobs. And you had to tune into the radio station. Or you had the big buttons. Remember the big buttons? I miss those things. I miss things like that. What was your first car? I'm thinking, and I know I'm probably going off on a tangent here, but my very first car I bought from my Aunt Nancy for $400. It was a blue Gremlin. Loved that car. And had the Levi seats. If you're not familiar with that, the seats were made out of Levi jean material. It was awesome. Come on. But for me, the funny part was the passenger side. Whoever had to sit in the passenger side. Well, hold on. Let me take a step back. The driver's side door was like welded because something wrong was with the door. I can't remember if my aunt had gotten into an accident or something like that, but the driver's side door didn't open, so you had to get in on the passenger side. But if you sat in the passenger side, it really sucked during the winter because there was holes in the floor and the snow or water would get into the inside of the passenger seat. One quick story, my good friends Chris and Jim, we were leaving the high school, and I was taking those guys home, and Jim saw a hitchhiker, and he's like, Tommy, pull over. I want to mess with him. I'm like, okay. So we pull over, and Jim sticks his head out the window, and he goes, hey, you want to ride? The guy's like, yeah, sure. So he starts running towards the car, and Jim goes, floor it, and the car dies. I know I'm going to hell for this one, but so the car dies, the guy's booking towards the car, and Jim's screaming, Chris is screaming, come on, let's go, and finally got the car started right before the guy got to the car and peeled out, and so, anyway, that's my little story of way back then. I don't even know where I was going with this. Oh, well, anyway, thanks for listening. Thanks for downloading, caring, sharing. I am greatly appreciated. And if you can, I'll just ask now, could you please, however you get this podcast, can you please just go to there and recommend and rate and review? Please. Thank you. All right, on the show, we have Elisabeth. And let me spell that because this is a great name. And she spells it a little differently. And that's Elisabeth Stitt, S-T-I-T-T, but she spells it Elisabeth, Elisabeth Stitt. She's the founder of Joyful Parenting Coaching. She has a book called Parenting as a Second Language. And the story with Elisabeth was she reached out to me on LinkedIn. And you can find me on LinkedIn at The Tommy Maloney. That's a Jeffrey Gitomer little tidbit, but I digress. Anyway, she found me on LinkedIn and said, hey, I'd love to set up a Zoom, wink, wink, sponsor, Zoom. And we had a Zoom talk, and it was wonderful. We really had great conversation. We had great conversation. And then about 2 days later, I was thinking about going, crap, we should have recorded that. That was just, her knowledge as a parenting coach was just phenomenal. And like I said, 2 days later, I said, let's do a podcast. My only concern is that whatever we talked about, I hope we can recreate or maybe create new dialogue. But she did. She brought her A game. A lot of fun. And I hope you enjoy this episode with Elisabeth Stitt. Again, Elisabeth is the founder of Joyful Parenting Coaching, the author of Parenting as a Second Language. A couple things we talk about on the show, why you should have family meetings. And I also want to mention, let's just say this. I also want to mention before you hear Elisabeth's episode, before you get married, if you're about to become a blended family, have those family meetings beforehand. Discuss things, and maybe this is first the two potential parents. For example, handling discipline, handling finances, things of that nature. As you've maybe heard before on episodes of the podcast, my wife Anna and I are going through the Dave Ramsey course. And that's what someone reminded me of Dave Ramsey talking about not having a car payment. I paid $400 for that Gremlin. I had no car payments. Anyway, family meetings, why they're important. And also, Elisabeth and their family do something really unique as far as naming houses, as far as what their house name is and what the former spouse's house name. I thought this was awesome. This is something that you can take away and use for your family. All right, that's all I got for you today. That's it. Gave you a really boring story about my Gremlin and tuning in and things like that. And so Elisabeth Stitt is on the show. Super excited. I know you're going to get a lot from her. You can also find her at elisabethstitt.com and on the Facebook and all that good stuff. So without boring you even more about way back then stories, here is my episode with Elisabeth Stitt on Blending the Family podcast. I am Tommy Maloney. Have a great day, but I truly mean it. We should have just recorded that last call because I'm
over again.
I know, but it was a great conversation that I'm afraid that we're going to miss out on something because you were so brilliant and I'm not, and so there you go.
Hey, I am totally capable of being brilliant again.
Let me do the canned first question. Are you ready?
Sure.
So, Elisabeth, tell us about your book because I love the title, Parenting as a Second Language, and it's Goalkeeper Media. Hold on, I gotta talk about that first. Does that have anything to do with sports?
It's not. It's not my company actually. My editor, Valerie Alexander, she wrote the first book in the series, and that book was called Happiness as a Second Language. And the basis for both books is the same, and that is that there's so much which we assume is innate, and that some people have and other people don't, and that just isn't the case. Happiness is a skill. It can be practiced. You can learn discrete skills and practice it. And parenting is definitely a skill. And we just don't realize it because we used to learn it as we grew up, as part of social groups. as we were out playing on the streets and, we were the older kids taking care of the younger kids, we were learning parenting skills.
Well, here's where I'm going to, I'm going to say disagree, because as an only child, I was very much, and even to this day, very much an introvert. And here's where I ran into issues with my first wife, and that was, she told me that I would not be a good parent because I didn't have any siblings, I didn't babysit, I didn't have that type of experience. So, I still think I did okay. My son, he likes to hear the story of how he fell off the bed the one time I wasn't keeping an eye on him. But, is it really a skill, or is it something that we develop on a fight or flight point?
Well, okay, think of it this way. If you have an idea of what the game of tennis is, and you pick up a tennis racket and you take a bucket of balls and you go out into the tennis court and you start doing stuff, you are going to learn how to hit a ball. You're probably even going to learn how to hit it over the net. You're probably even going to figure out how to hit it over the net into the right square. Eventually you might learn to serve. But obviously if you grew up playing tennis and you grew up doing that, it would be much easier.
Exactly.
But it's not that you can't, but that's the point, Tom, is that you learned how to do it. You might have learned how to do it on the fly, but you learned how to do it. There still were skills to learn. And parenting used to be easier because we didn't have to figure out as many of those skills on the fly.
Oh, I agree.
That's the point. And I think that when people walk around with the notion that they should just know how to do it, that is detrimental to them, because it suggests that if they feel like they're not doing it, that there's something wrong with them.
Well, looking back, I was talking to somebody the other day about because my parents were divorced, and I would take the train from the burbs of Chicago to downtown Chicago, and it was no big thing of just hopping on the train as a young kid and meeting my dad at the train station. I really do believe parenting was a lot easier, not to sound ancient, but back in the day, it just seemed that it was not easier, but just a different way of life, so to speak.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And I do think that, well, first of all, I think that life was a little bit slower. And so there was just a little bit more time in the day for parents to parent. I think one of the biggest challenges that we face today is just finding enough time to be with our kids and then to actually parent them. But, the other thing is that there were more common expectations in a community of what effective parenting meant. And so a parent could kind of look around and go like, oh, how are they handling this? Okay, I'll do that. And today I think that communities are much more heterogeneous and are influenced by a lot of different cultures.
I'm sorry. I don't have a college education. What was that word?
Heterogeneous?
Yeah.
You know that word. Homogeneous meaning they're very the same. Heterogeneous meaning they're very diverse.
Ah. Word of the day.
Word of the day. Very good. Sorry, I'm an English teacher. You got to give me a little leeway here. My kids at school used to say to me, "Can you stop using those big words?" It's like, no, I cannot. But you may always raise your hand and ask what it means.
No, and it's again, your kids were. I don't want to say they were wrong, but yeah, it's good to learn on a daily basis. even those $20 words.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
The one thing that I was thinking about when you're talking about community, and again, going back as when we were kids, it did seem that the community was a lot stronger. And as a community, you would recognize, all right, so my kids are outside. Maybe one parent is, doing something in the house, but another parent or a couple other parents would somewhat take over being the observers, making sure everybody was okay. It just seemed tighter knit than it does now. I mean, I could be wrong, but I mean, I'd look at like when I was married the first time. I think that was a rare occurrence. We lived in a cul-de-sac, and we were a very tight-knit group. But I look at it because we lived in a cul-de-sac, and because as families we were very engaged versus not living in that type of dynamics, living, off of the beaten path. Do you see similarities to that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that goes hand in hand with what I was saying. So part of it is that we schedule our kids so much that we're not physically home. So in those rare occasions when we are physically home, we'd like to send our kid out to play, or we'd like to step outside and meet a neighbor, and they are off driving their kid to their kid's activity. And so I find that people on the street end up sort of being like ships in the night, that you might wave to them as you're pulling into your driveway and they're pulling out of theirs.
It's sad because I was at, being a former member of Toastmasters, I was at a Toastmaster event, and a good friend of mine named Chris, she gave a presentation about neighborhoods. And part of her exercise was you had a piece of paper that had a grid on it. And the grid represented your neighborhood. And you needed to write down your neighbors' names. And I knew one. And that was, that was just our next door neighbor. And I felt really awful that I don't know more of our neighbors. And it comes into the only time you really see some of the neighbors is, oh my gosh, your mail ended up in our mailbox. Here you go. Hey, thank you. Nice seeing you. Have a good day. Bye. And it's sad. It is really sad because, and we're going to definitely talk about blended families on this episode, but I feel bad, for example, my son, because my son is an hour away from where we live. He has his own friends and community. But when he comes and is with us every other weekend, he doesn't know anybody here. And I feel bad. And I know there are some kids, and I know some kids his age, and even he plays hockey and baseball. And I know that, and we've seen it before. He and I have seen it, that other kids in this neighborhood play hockey. But I don't know where the wall is. I don't know why we are not engaging in those other families to say, hey, this is Connor, I'm Tommy, we live down here. I don't know what it is these days that again, I'm just going to generalize, but we as a society really don't engage as much as we used to. And I'll tell you the biggest, and maybe this is just living in Colorado, but one of the biggest things I noticed when I first moved here was the neighborhoods, the houses, all have fences. And growing up in the Midwest, you really didn't see a lot of that. I mean, your neighbors didn't have fences. They had the yard right next to you, and if your ball landed in that yard, then you went over there to get the ball. Now you have to either climb over a fence, or you have to, knock on the door, or you don't get that ball back, as in the movie Sandlot. Yeah.
That's an interesting observation. I grew up in California where we do have fences, but my relatives lived in New York and New England where they tend not to have fences. And I remember playing in the backyard and being able to look at everybody else's yards and thinking that's so weird. You can look at everybody else's yard.
Exactly.
so there is a perspective of what. So I would say in California, where there were a lot of fences, the expectation was you could do anything in the front yard and on the street. And then if you were going into people's backyards, you kind of sort of needed to say, I mean, we were much freer to run in and out of each other's houses, but probably we were still with somebody else.
Right.
In the family. I can just give you really quickly my theory on why things have changed.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be quickly, Elizabeth. Take your time. Relax.
So one of the challenges that we face, as I was saying, was that because we live in these very diverse communities, and also because on the internet, when you go looking for an answer to a question, right, you used to be out on the street so you could talk to your neighbor or see how your neighbor did something, and that was probably good enough for you. Now, you don't, your neighbor's at work until 6 o'clock and pulling in and getting dinner in bed, and so you don't have time to talk to them, and you're also trying to get dinner and get the kids to bed. So it isn't until, 10 o'clock that you get onto the internet and you go try to find a parenting answer. And when you get there, you find 364 different answers, and some of them are very strongly held opinions where one person will say, if you do this, you're a good parent. If you do that, you're a horrible parent. And then you'll find somebody else who says the opposite. So that's the first challenge, is that we don't have a communal sense of what are appropriate parenting choices. And that just means that we as a parent have to make every single decision by ourselves, which is lonely and isolating and anxiety producing. You add to that there are no societal structures that support parenting anymore. We used to have this concept of 9 to 5. And I don't know about you, Tommy, but I like the elementary school, we started at 9 and we ended at 2:30. I don't know of a single elementary school that starts later than 8:30 these days. I know of schools that start at 8:15 or 8. And every school that I know goes to at least 2:50, if not 3 o'clock or 3:15. So kids are physically in school longer, which means parents are having to get kids up and out of the house sooner. Not to mention, a lot of parents are having to show up at work themselves. So lots and lots of kids are being dropped at early morning childcare and then not being picked up until 6 o'clock. That leaves very little time to parent, which again adds to your anxiety. So I think that there are just a lot of extra layers that parents today are carrying around that parents didn't used to carry around. Even things like the Sabbath. I don't know if this is true for you in your community, but in our community, sports games are scheduled on Sundays. And so that puts a parent in a position, this just makes me so mad, where a parent has to make a choice between the child's commitment to the team and the commitment to the family that we're going to go to church. And we're going to go to, whatever kind of worship we do, whether it's Saturday or Sunday or whatever it is. But the point is that people didn't used to have to make that choice. Nobody would dream of scheduling a sports game. In a largely Christian community, nobody would dream of scheduling a sports game on a Sunday. I'm trying to think back, and I agree. I remember playing Little League Baseball, and you played. It wasn't competitive, but we played maybe one game during the week and then a game on a Saturday, and that was it. I agree with you, Elizabeth. I don't recall ever having sports on Sunday other than, watching football, but that's a different story. But you bring up a really good point where I want to segue into blended families, and that is talking about discipline and talking about disciplining not your child,
but your new spouse's child. And I firmly believe that when couples are first dating, that these are little things they really don't think about. And that was one of early conversations my wife Ann and I had was, all right, I have a son, she has 2 daughters. How are we going to handle discipline? And it turned out that my wife's oldest daughter, Betsy, my wife would handle disciplining her, but her and I would be allowed to discipline the other 2. And the other 2 are closer in age. Right now, Becca's 16, Connor's 15. So they were, again, very close in age. How do you advise parents about discipline? And it could be a traditional family, but it could also be in a blended family.
Okay, so the first litmus test I always use is it working? So, for instance, did that work for you? Did it work for both of you to be able to equally discipline the younger 2 kids?
Yes, in our household it did.
Okay, then that was effective parenting. That's kind of the bottom line. The bottom line is if it's working, great, don't break it. Okay, so that being said, I think that agreeing what is a discipline issue, and B, how to handle and approach that discipline issue. I would say the majority of the coaching that I do is really around that. So, first of all, it really helps for parents to kind of understand and to know that a range of parenting it can be effective. That it's not like dead set in the bullet, like shoot the arrow and just the middle, that's the only way to be an effective parent. There really are a lot of choices that you can make as a parent. And this is one of the great things about teaching for 25 years was I saw a ton of kids and a ton of different families. And the families had different approaches and different expectations and different ways of disciplining their kids. And I'd say the primary factor as to whether or not it was effective was A, whether or not the parent was clear and consistent about it, and then B, there was some personality things going on there. Some discipline techniques are more effective for one type of child, and some are more effective for a child with a different kind of personality.
And you bring up an excellent point because, to use the blended family model, that was a lesson I had to learn. And the lesson was, again, my wife's oldest daughter, Betsy, very A personality. I would even go as A++ personality. And when she's in college now, but when she was in high school, I'll never forget, she came home right away, got the homework done. My son, who is very similar traits as Betsy, and after reading study after study, I'm sure it deals with him also being the first child. So he has those, I want to call them time management skills as well. And luckily that comes from his playing sports because he realized very early on that he had to get homework done before getting to practice or to a game. With Becca, she is more of, she comes home, she has to decompress first, relax, have a snack or 4. And for me, that's where I really had to take a huge step back because, again, I was so used to, and I started doing this too, comparing and, thinking, oh, both girls are going to be like this, and they're not. And it's beautiful to watch, and it's beautiful, again, to be that third party. But it was even a good lesson for me to learn as a parent when to step in and when to take a step back. And it took me a while to realize, again, Becca had to come home, relax, goof off, And then when she felt she was ready, then she would go work on her homework. So that was a real eye-opener for me to be able to not be a disciplinarian and just go, oh, I get it. She needs to relax. She needs to, get out of the school zone, versus the other two where they want to stay in that school zone and then have fun.
And then be done with it, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, kudos to you. Hooray that you were flexible enough and observant enough.
Well, it wasn't quick, but as I tell a lot of people, I played over 20 years of hockey, adult league hockey, as a goalie, so I took a lot of pucks to the head, Elisabeth. So I'll admit it takes me a while to figure things out. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, but you figured it out in the end. And,
yeah.
I think that's another really, really important thing for both parents and kids, no matter what kind of family they're in, is to realize we are all in process. We are all learning. None of us is perfect. No one expert has the answer. So it's always going to be some degree of muddling through. And that's okay. Because, that's part of being human and part of growing and yeah, so, I think that as a parenting coach, I try to give parents some kind of big picture structure. There has been a lot of research around parenting styles. We do kind of now recognize that most kids tend to thrive under an authoritative style, which is sort of this mixture of a lot of warmth and connection and support, but also clarity and high expectations. But even within that model, it's really important to note that some kids just need more structure. They feel safer and more secure when there's a little bit more of an attitude of, let's go, kid. This is the plan. This is what you need to do. And other kids need a little bit more leeway in figuring out things in their own space and their own timing and their own way to do it.
Well,
you don't have to hit the target dead on. It's okay to be an outlier.
Well, I am somewhat going to pick on traditional families versus blended families with that point, and that is, in my opinion, my view is that traditional families, they get to see their children more on a daily basis, and they get to see, them develop and habits created, versus a blended family where a lot of times, the parents don't get to see their children on a consistent basis, and it can be difficult not only for the parent but for the child, going from household to household and having one household with one type of rules, other household with another type of rules. But as I think about what I'm saying right now, I go back to what you were just saying and, learning what type of atmosphere our children want and need, and maybe even taking a step further, Elisabeth, and having a sit down with the kids and saying, all right, what can I do as a parent to help you grow, be it with schoolwork or housework or what have you?
Yeah, I think absolutely. Why not? Who knows himself better than the child?
Right.
Right? So, I think getting input from kids is always a great idea. In fact, I am a big proponent of family meetings because the way that I structure family meetings, it essentially gives everybody a chance to kind of to be heard and to have their input be a part of things. And I think that is incredibly valuable. And in fact, I think that one of the biggest mistakes that I made, if I could have my blended family do-over, I would have insisted on having family meetings before my daughter and I even moved in with my husband and my stepsons, because I think that it would have given everybody a chance to answer exactly that question. You know, given that this is where we're headed and this is what's going to happen, what is it, sweetheart, that you need to make this workable and to make it happen? And, you know, it's not to say that the first time you ask the question, you might not get an answer you don't want to hear, right? You might get the answer from your kid. There's nothing that I need because this shouldn't happen, and there's nothing you could change to make it happen. But, you know, hopefully if you've been doing a good job of introducing the kids to each other in a kind of gradual way, where before there's been any talk or any thought of moving in together, you've already had a lot of shared common fun experiences that, you know, hopefully the kids have a sense of each other as people who are fun, or at least people that we do fun things with. So, you know, that doesn't mean that there won't still be some shock. You know, like, there's a difference between, like, oh, okay, we're going spending the day at the beach and having a whole day together versus you're going to be using up my bathroom time. that could be, you know, I can imagine for your older daughter having one more person using her resources was not a great source of delight to her. On the one hand, you know, and then on the other hand, there were probably things that she was totally fine with that maybe the daughter closer in age to him felt there was a little bit more stickiness or a little bit more doubt.
Well, I have to laugh because there was, I think it was the first summer that my wife and I moved in together. It was March of 2012. We were getting married in that August of 2012. And originally we weren't going to move in together until after the wedding. And it came down to financial. It just made more sense. But that summer, again, I'm laughing because I came from, you know, being just a guy and with a son, and we were just two idiot boys at times, just like to goof and have fun and talk sports and play sports. And that summer of 2012, it was an eye-opener for me because not only was myself and my son coming into a house of 3 women, including one of the dogs was a female, but my wife's niece decided that after she graduated from college, she wanted to move to Colorado. And so I went from my wife, 2 daughters, now my wife's niece, 4 women, and only having my son every other weekend. The estrogen was a little too high for me at times. And at that time, the home office was actually downstairs. So what I would do is I would grab a wine glass and say, I'll be in the office if anybody needs me, because I just didn't know how to handle, you know, a room full of women. And the other thing was, again, as an only child, I really didn't learn conflict resolution until probably when I got into high school. And having 2 bonus daughters, I didn't understand the dynamics of sisters and their weird love of yelling at each other and picking on each other. I didn't understand that. So that was another eye-opener for me, was I didn't know how to handle it other than hiding, which occasionally I still do.
Yeah, totally. I can absolutely see how that was a big shock to you.
Luckily, we have enough bathrooms, though. Unlike the Brady Bunch, who only had, 1 bathroom for all 6 kids? Yeah. And the funny thing is, I have to go down this path. And the funny thing about the Brady Bunch, do you recall what the dad, Mike Brady's job was? His career?
He was an architect.
Exactly. Couldn't he have designed another bathroom in that house? I just always found that really ironic and funny at the same time.
Well, that's, that's a good point. And again, on the other hand, maybe there was a higher expectation in that era that people get along and they learn to share their resources.
Well, I mean, I know it was just a TV show, but I really feel that show was way ahead of its time as far as creating a blended family. And I mean, that was not even a phrase on that show, and either was the word step. I can only recall one time ever hearing the word step, and that's when Carol Brady said the only steps in this house are the ones that lead upstairs. So again, I really feel that they were way ahead of their time. I just find that show very fascinating because a lot of those lessons in that 30-minute show are real lessons when it comes to blended families.
Yeah, and actually that's a good point. That's a really good point, Tommy. And one of the things that I had thought about was, what is it that makes I don't know about you. When my marriage fell apart, I felt incredibly guilty that I had really failed my daughter in some way, because she was now going to pay the price for the rest of her life in terms of having to go back and forth between two different homes. And then the decision to blend a family was one that I took very slowly and very seriously, because it felt like a big, big ask to, because she and I lived alone in a little apartment, and like you described with your son, I mean, we had the girl version of that.
Right.
And it was easy and comfortable and fun. And I was now asking her to blend in with another household with different expectations, with, a different feel to it. Actually, a whole different culture, because my husband's East Indian. So, as was his first wife, so, his boys are that too. My mother-in-law lived in the house. I mean, that was a big ask. And so, yeah, the guilt was there. But then when I began to think about it, it's like, well, wait a minute. Divorce is a new way that we are ending up with blended families. But actually, blended families have been the norm when you consider that for ages, and I really mean centuries, lots of women died in childbirth. Lots of men died in war or in accidents. And so there were a lot of reasons why, a wife who lost her husband would have to remarry, because she would have had no way to support her family. A husband who lost his wife would need somebody at home running the home front in order to be able to go out to hunt and gather, to farm, to do the job, to do whatever it was. So, I kind of felt like, this is, families have always been stable, and now I'm doing this terrible thing to my child in trying to blend a family. But in fact, that there have been blended families all along. And I think one of the things that the Brady Bunch only touches on a little bit is the you're not my real dad, you're not my real mom.
Yeah.
Question. Right? Because I do think actually with most blended families, that's actually easier. Because it's so clear. It's like, no, I'm not your mom. Your mom lives over there.
I have to interrupt you on this. I'm sorry, but you bring up that I love you brought up this point, and it goes back to these are tough conversations that you have to have at the beginning. Conversations such as again, who's going to discipline who? Financials. Now you have your bank account, they have their bank account. What are you going to do? I mean, just an example there, it took my wife and I about 2 years to finally put all of our accounts into one bank versus having 4 different banks. But I have to tell you this story, Elisabeth, and that was right after my wife and I decided to get the kids together, and it was working out really well. One night I had to take Betsy to church for an event. And on our way to church, and as smart and as intelligent as Betsy is, she doesn't like conflict. And I think that's why her and I get along so well, but at times we butt heads because we're very similar. We're both very introverts. We don't like conflict. But I wanted to have that conversation with her. I wanted to say, hey, I'm not here to replace your dad, just like your mom is not going to replace Connor's mom. I love you. I love your mom. I love your sister. I love the dogs. And it was one of those moments where, because she doesn't like conflict, her head was in her phone texting. And at one point she just said, okay. And it wasn't a disappointment. It was, I know she's listening, but again, if I didn't recognize early on, going back to how the kids do their homework, then I would have really felt defeated. But again, knowing that she doesn't like to be embarrassed or things like that, I knew I got through to her. But at the same time, the big picture is we have to have those tough conversations. You have to have those tough conversations going into the relationship.
Yes. And I again, hats off for having it and for being clear and, for really telling her openly, to tell her, I love you. I love your mom. I think that too many people, too many step parents are reluctant to be that open and vulnerable and to say it. And just as a side here, one of my favorite techniques even for adults, but especially for kids, is to say, I don't need you to respond to this right now if you don't want to. But I need to know that you're listening to me. And again, that you don't require the eye contact, just as long as you get some kind of shrug or something. Yeah, I'm listening to you. And then, say your piece, short and sweet, and then let it go. And again, it's very mature of you not to be upset that you didn't get an answer from her. And I think that too often, we don't get the sort of positive affirmation back that we're hoping for, right? It can't have been super easy for you to open your heart and to just lay it out there. But
no.
We don't recognize that it's okay. It doesn't matter. It's still, because we're the adults, it's still our job to, as you say, to have the hard conversations.
Both my wife and I, we really wanted the marriage to work out, and to a lot of people, and I know you and I talked about this last week on just our phone call, but to a lot of people, when I tell them that we had this agreement that if the kids didn't get along, we weren't going to continue on. And I'll give a prime example. We were counseling, my wife and I were actually counseling another couple. They were dating. He has 2 kids, she has 1. And we told them, if your kids don't get along, it's not going to be good for all of you as a whole. And it was sad because what happened was two of the boys got into a fight, and one of the parents had to leave because it just was not a healthy environment. And I know to a lot of people that might be extreme, but if you want to have a successful blended family, and if you're one of those people that continues to say that they always put the kids first, you have to mean it, and your actions have to show it. And it was very. I got a text message this morning from a friend of mine who said that he had watched my TEDx talk, and he said that his dad did that. He said that his dad, when his dad remarried, he made sure that the kids got along. He made sure that the kids' needs came first. And he told me that because of his dad and his bonus mom, because of their actions, they did become a loving, successful family.
So what's really striking me here then is the importance of entering into the blended family relationship with an enormous amount of care and thoughtfulness. Right? Because it's much harder and more painful for everybody to get into the middle of the situation and then to go like, okay, this really isn't working. We need to back out of it. Right? I mean, by that time, even logistically, it probably means that one family or the other has already given up a home that they previously had. And in fact, one of the things I did, and it sounds crazy from a monetary point of view, Tommy, but I continued to pay rent in my apartment for 6 months after I moved in with my husband.
Was it a safety net?
It was just that. It was that if it wasn't going to work, I figured my daughter had already had to move into too many homes. Right? She had a home with her dad. I moved into an apartment. That was a new home. I'm moving her into my husband's house. That's a new home. If that didn't work, I wanted to at least move her back to the apartment. All right, something in my throat.
When you're talking about how you felt after your divorce, I felt as a man the biggest failure on the planet. As a dad, I felt like the biggest failure on the planet because I just felt that I didn't live up to the expectations of marriage and being a provider to my son. Because officially, December 23rd, 2008 is when I was officially divorced. And I didn't know how to handle that situation. I didn't know how to handle being divorced. I didn't know how to handle the first Christmas. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier, how I hide. And that's what I did. I hid from my son. I told him, I said, you're going to, spend Christmas with your mom. I'm going to, and I was on the road for work, and that's what I did. I just stayed on the road for work. Actually went to visit my mom and bonus dad for that first Christmas because, again, I didn't have the tools. I didn't know how to actually, and this goes to pick on us men, we're afraid to ask for help. And I was afraid to ask for help, and I put a lot of that stress and anger and depression and kept it inside, and the only thing I knew what to do was go to mom.
That must have been so hard. And yeah, I mean, it's such a balance, isn't it? Because at some point, we have to be there for the kids, but we also have to kind of take care of ourselves before we can be present for our kid.
Correct.
Right? Because who's to say that if you had him that Christmas, but you had just been a total wreck, that wouldn't have placed more of a burden on him?
Right. Well,
So, again, not a lot of fast answers.
No, and it goes back to what you were talking about earlier as far as, you go into, we'll say Google, and you type in parenting, you're going to get thousands of different answers to parent, and, what is the right way, what is the wrong way. Only you know your family dynamics, and like you were saying, what works. Did that work? It worked. Then continue doing that.
Yes, exactly. I think the harder part is so here's the little bone that I would pick about saying to parents, if the kids don't get along, then you should put your kids first and you should divorce. And here's the tricky part. The tricky part is that it's not essentially good for kids to have that much power, right? To say that I have enough power that I can take my mother away from the relationship that's making her happy, and I can mess the situation up. So there's this really fine line between, as the adult, on the one hand, really recognizing how serious is this situation, how hard is it going to be to improve the relationship between these kids, how long is that going to take, how much of a toll is it going to take, versus, I stepped into this blended family relationship because I believed that ultimately this was going to support my child. It was going to be good for my child. And that's a really tricky one. And I can't even tell you how often I've sat with the scales, with my two hands out, with the scales. Okay, on the one hand there's this, on the other hand there's this, and the one hand there's this, the other hand there's this. And I can tell you that as a teacher, one of the things that I saw was that I saw a pattern of parents sacrificing everything for their kids, but then kind of getting stuck and feeling bitter and not moving on with their own lives in any way, which in the short run can support the child, but in the long run becomes a burden to the child. So when I was seeing kids, I taught middle school, when I was seeing kids by 7th or 8th grade, what may have provided a lot of security for the kid in the short run in terms of we're going to put you first and I'm going to meet your needs. But now the parent was so much in the mode of I'm here to help you, I'm here for you. It was like the parent had developed no life outside of the child, and that's a big burden for a child to carry. So one of the things that I was keeping in mind when I got divorced, I had one goal. And that goal was not to become, I guess, two goals. Not to become bitter, not to let, I could have been the victim, and I could have, there was lots of reasons to complain. And I just kept saying, what does my child need most? She needs me to move forward. She needs me to find my own happiness. And now I totally believe that, I believe this with two married people, that it's always your job to find your own happiness within the context of the parameters of the situation that you're in. So, my hope actually would be that married couples find a way to be happy within their marriage. But that is very much the responsibility of each individual, right? There's really nothing I can do to affect your happiness, Tommy. I can only take care of my own happiness. And in that process, open up the space for you to also express what you need. It doesn't say that I can't meet your needs. It's just that first and foremost, you can't make me happy. Only I can make me happy. So trying to keep this balance of okay, when am I asking too much of the child? And when am I going to just recognize this is a rough patch, and that ultimately my child's going to benefit from having a happy mother who is, because, Tommy, I think you can talk to this because you grew up in a house of divorce. Did you, when you were with your dad, did you ever worry about your mom and what she was doing or how she was? And when you were with your mom, did you ever worry about how your dad was?
That's a great question because since I lived with my mom, I didn't have that thought, but I truly remember having that thought when I was either leaving my dad for the weekend or from thoughts from time to time. And I'm no psychiatrist, but I'm guessing as I'm thinking about this is because we didn't have such a solid relationship until later in life. So, yeah, I did have my moments of thinking about, is my dad okay? Is he lonely? Is he, what's he doing?
Yeah. Must be lonely without you. Of course he is.
Well, duh, it's me, Tommy, of course.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So, one of my goals was, when I started dating, I was not looking for a relationship. That's for sure. But I wanted to get the sense that I was going out and having fun and doing things. And, in my case, I'm pretty nerdy, so it was pretty tame fun. I like to folk dance. I like to ballroom dance. I like to sing, so I signed up and I sang with a lot of choirs. But the idea that it wasn't like I was sitting at home alone with nothing to do when she was at her dad's. It was more like, great, you go to your dad's and I'll go and do these things, and when you get back, we'll be together. And then, and I didn't tell her, because she was only 3, I didn't tell her I was dating. And I don't think that even if she'd been older, she would have needed to know that. On the other hand, had she asked, right, had she been, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 or something, and she had asked, when I go to dad's, are you dating anybody? I would have told her the truth. I would have said, yeah, I go out with guys. We go dancing, we do such and such. And, had she been worried about, well, are you going to fall in love again? Are you going to remarry? I would have probably been straightforward about saying, I don't know. I'm not setting out to do that. And at the same time, I'm not setting out not to do it.
Mm.
But I do think that it really paid off when, as she got to middle school, high school herself, and then it was like my weekend, and she wanted to go out and see her friends, that's natural, right?
Right.
You come to an age where even though your heart is breaking a little bit because you're only seeing them every other week, for her, it's like, well, if I don't get to go out at dad's house because he wants to see me, and I don't get to go out at mom's house because she wants to see me, that just doesn't work, because then I don't ever get to go out with my friends. So again, I know that it was like solid and comforting to her that she could go out with her friends on a Friday night, and I was not alone. She wasn't abandoning me to an empty apartment.
Well, that is something that was my struggle early in my divorce. And, you would get those, my former wife would get the invites of, sleepovers and birthday parties. And, all you're thinking as a parent, this is my weekend. I don't want to share, my son because I don't get to see him every day. But again, you have to take a step back and go, all right, no big deal. It's not permanent. Life goes on, whatever other cliches out there. But that was difficult, and that was hard. I've had conversations with other experts such as yourself in the blended family space, and having the discussion of what traditional families really don't understand when it comes to, divorced families and somewhat of the traditional every other weekend parent. And, you feel like that those events are taking away from your time, and they're being selfish by having your son or daughter at their sleepover, at their party, at their birthday party. And it's like, no, that's That's kid stuff, literally, and they want to do it. And so, for me, it was really difficult, sharing my son, because knowing, the relationship I had with my dad wasn't, as I look back, I don't recall a lot of every other weekend or the schedule. And I didn't want that type of relationship. I wanted a healthy relationship that my son knew that I was always going to be there. I saw, years ago, there was on the History Channel, one of my favorite comedians, Tim Conway, and he was talking about when he got divorced, that he found a house that was like a block away from his former wife. And that's how they were able to co-parent, was that he stayed within the same neighborhood. So that was something I set out to do, was when I finally was starting to look for a place to live, I found a townhome, which was less than a mile from my son and his mom's house. And it was great because now he and I are close by. And the other piece of advice I got was, when you go out to get furniture for the kids, make sure they're involved in that decision as well. And what I did, I kind of nudged my son towards choosing one set of bedroom furniture versus another one. But, my encouragement to him was, look, you made this decision. This is your furniture. How cool is that? So, yeah, it gets rough when you have traditional families versus blended families, and being able to spend quality time with your kids.
Yes, it does. It does. And I think that, a biological family is a given. Nobody has to work to make a biological family. It's just there. A blended family is a work of art. You really have to craft it. And I think that it's the small little rituals and the small little connections that do that, right? Because it is possible just to be two. And I think, I'm sad. I'm sad because I think that my husband and I erred a little bit in this direction. And on the one hand, yes, we probably made our lives easier in some ways. For instance, you were talking about finances. And my husband and I kept our finances are essentially still separate. And on the one hand, it saved a lot of trouble in terms of ex-spouses and custody and child support and some of those issues. On the other hand, we did less of the work that you might have had to do just to really find a compromise and really to say, okay, what are we going to do in our family in this house here?
Right.
So, I think that parents that really take the time to craft the family carefully, and again, I'll go back to family meetings, because I think family meetings can be a super great way to say that here we are all present, and everybody gets a voice, and, we're going to use this forum to solve issues and to bring up problems and to make sure that, kind of shine the light in the dusty corners. And we're going to use this time as a family to plan fun and to help us define what do we mean. I think I mentioned to you before, one thing that we did do that kind of helped was to sort of refer to the household by name, by the street name of the house.
Oh, right.
Right? As it is, I kept my maiden name when I got married the first time. And so my daughter already had she had her dad's name. And then, we come into the house and there's a new name. And so it's like, well, what are we? Are we the Stitts? Are we the selves? Are we the Padmakumars? And that's a hard thing to get around. And so we just said, we are Woodleaf. That was the street we live on. So this is the Woodleaf house, the Woodleaf home. In fact, we even sometimes said the Woodleaf bunch. And because we needed some way of identifying, it's this tricky balance, because on the one hand, you want your child to understand that his family is you and his mother and his stepmother and his stepfather. Whereas for you, your family really is not your ex-spouse and her new husband and his new whatever. And so there's this kind of tricky, it's almost like a Venn diagram thing, right? Like if you think about it, a biological family, they all fit neatly in the circle. Blended families have, most of them have 3 different families, right?
Oh yeah.
There's sort of 3 different rings. There's the ring for the child of the mother, there's the ring for the child of the father, and then there's the ring which is now this new couple. And if there are new siblings from that couple, they are part of that ring too. So it's like, okay, how do we acknowledge the presence of all 3 rings and at the same time make this ring where we intersect in the middle be something special and unique?
I want to honor your time, Elisabeth. So far you've given 2 wonderful tips. And first one was, again, family meetings. Number 2, I really like that idea of describing the household as just a street address. That is, I really like that. What other one tip could you offer for a family to help them either be successful, or maybe it's something, a blended family just hasn't thought of yet, and they go, oh, that might work for us. Anything come to mind?
It's less unique to blended families and more just my general advice to parents that if they keep in mind that the relationship is more important than the problem, and that, we get into a mode where we want to solve this problem, and this isn't right, and this can't happen, and that needs to happen. And if we step back from that and we always go to the point of like, okay, we've got this problem and it's sitting out here on the table. Let's all sit down around the table and take a look at this problem and see what we can do to solve it. But this problem is not bigger than we are. And we might not figure this out today, but we're going to figure this problem out. And when families approach things in that way, whatever it is, whether it's your kid is using marijuana or your 4-year-old is calling people poopy face and sticking his tongue out and spitting all over everyone, those are both problems. They're not bigger problems than the family. And if you can present that strong sense of, we are a family, we will figure this out, we might need some help to figure it out, but that's just a problem, and it's sitting over there. That problem isn't big enough to break us. Now, of course, the kids know ultimately that that's not a undeniable truth, because if that were true, their first family wouldn't have broken up. And at the same time, the more that we can put that out as our confidence that we can figure this out and that we're in this together to figure this out, the more the kids can absorb that and feel settled and secure with that. Like, let's say the kids are really fighting, and let's say you are feeling like, wow, we might get to the point where we do have to break up this new family in order that the kids aren't hating each other and fighting so much. That still might be the solution that you come to, but you're still going to come to it together as a family, and we're still going to work on this. And that's still a problem which is external, and we can still function. It's kind of a tricky little bit of manipulation there.
Well, Elisabeth, I greatly appreciate your time today. Author of Parenting as a Second Language, also the founder of Joyful Parenting Coaching. How can the listeners get a hold of you or find you on the social?
The Facebook page is Joyful Parenting Coaching, so that can be found there. For parents of older kids, I have a Facebook group called, and no offense, but it is called Middle School Moms. Dads are totally welcome. I just like the alliteration of Middle School Moms.
Dad's getting picked on again because of alliteration.
So not right. Yeah, and my website is just my name, Elisabeth with an S, not a Z.
Mm-hmm.
Plus my last name, Stitt, S-T-I-T-T, so ElisabethStitt.com. And I do put out a weekly newsletter, and because I deal with parents of all ages, and because I deal with blended families and not blended families, my themes tend to be kind of big picture themes. And probably my most consistent theme is, how are you communicating to your kids in such a way that you are in flow with them and in connection with them, rather than butting heads and tearing the relationship apart.
Thank you for listening to Blending the Family. We hope this was time well spent while walking your dog.